equal representation can be achieved, and as parliamentarians, it's our job to work towards this goal by encouraging youth activism. You see the results here in our caucus, Mr. Speaker. Girls' government shows us that when we empower women and girls, anything is possible.
The honourable member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As part of our government's commitment to ensuring the safety of our children and youth, I'm pleased to announce today that the Protecting Canadians from Online Crime Act has come fully into force. The Canadians across the country have been confronted by the harmful reality of cyberbullying. With the coming into force of this legislation, we are sending a strong message to those who are out to harm our children that there is a point where bullying behavior goes beyond that and becomes a criminal behavior. This legislation will give law enforcement officers the tools they need to investigate these high-tech crimes. Will also make it an offense to distribute intimate images online. It will also empower the court to remove intimate images. It will also make it a crime to share intimate images, and it will make it possible to seize the devices used to actually commit this crime. The Protecting Canadians from Online Crime Act builds on the more than 30 tough-on-crime pieces of legislation put forward by this government. With the coming into force of this legislation, we are tackling the growing problem of cyberbullying and keeping online space.
The honourable member for Papineau.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday my son Xavier was very proud to tell me that his school, which is part of the Public School Board of Eastern Ontario, was celebrating La Francophonie Month. It's an opportunity for all of us to shine the spotlight on the millions of Francophones living in communities across Canada. Today, Francophones from around the world come to Canada to benefit from our rich cultural and linguistic diversity and to contribute to it. For centuries, French-speaking Canadians have contributed to the life and dynamism of our country, and they continue to be at the heart of our success. And this year, we can be especially proud of the fact that the Right Honourable Michael Jean was elected Secretary General of La Francophonie. The month of La Francophonie gives us the opportunity to promote the French language in Canada and around the world. Let's celebrate La Francophonie loud and wide.
The honourable member for Winnipeg South Centre.
The Liberal leader is being criticized for comparing current debates to the turning away of Jewish refugees in the 1930s and 1940s. Let me share what the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs had to say, and I quote, "We view this comparison as inaccurate and inappropriate, and we will communicate that sentiment to the Liberal leader's office. We note that the Government of Canada has appropriately and consistently distinguished between marginal extreme terrorist elements of the Muslim community and the broader Muslim community. This distinction is reflected by the more than 300,000 Muslim immigrants who have been welcomed to Canada since 2006, and no less by remarks offered by the Defence Minister supporting the Muslim community as recently as last Saturday." Quote, close quote. The Liberal leader, Mr. Speaker, must apologize for his comments.
The honourable member for Saint-Lambert. Mr. Speaker, well, we thought that the dinosaurs had all gone extinct, but it turns out there's still a few live specimens left in the Conservative caucus. Recently, one Conservative member questioned the theory of evolution. Then, another Conservative member stated that teaching sex ed in schools would push children straight into the hands of pedophiles. Then, last Friday, the member for New Brunswick Southwest said that the real problem with the temporary foreign worker program is that it brings too many brown-skinned people to Canada while whiteys rot on EI. These words are so shocking that even some other Conservative MPs have criticized their colleague from New Brunswick. Mr. Speaker, the election is coming soon, and soon Canadians will have the chance to vote out these dinosaurs.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Speaker, the Liberal leader is being criticized for comparing current debates to the turning away of Jewish refugees in the 1930s and 1940s. Let me share what B'nai B'rith Canada had to say. Quote, The Liberal leader's comparison of Canada's current immigration policy to that of the 1940s, which saw Jews barred from the country, is wholly inappropriate. The Liberal leader is the latest in a long line of politicians who fall into the trap of drawing highly inappropriate and offensive Nazi-era comparisons by using the phrase, "none is too many," haphazardly. Such language is divisive and only does a disservice to Canadians interested in dealing with pressing issues of the day. We must find the balance between freedom and security without resorting to inaccurate historical parallels that have no bearing on reality. The threat of radicalization and jihadist terror is real. We must all work together to address that threat while being part of a tolerant and pluralistic society. End of quote. The Liberal leader must apologize for his comments.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister planning an extension or expansion of Canada's role in the war in Iraq?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to thank the House for its support of the original mission that we put forward. I would also note the strong support of Canadians in a mission that we believe combating ISIL is essential for the security of our own country. In terms of extension, expansion, renewal, Mr. Speaker, the government has not yet taken a decision, but of course it will inform the House as soon as it has done so.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he is getting us into a real mess. Does the Prime Minister, have any idea when or how he is going to get us out of Iraq? Mr. Speaker, the government appreciates the support of the House for the mission against the Islamic State. We also have support of Canadians for our service people for this mission, which is so important for the safety and security of our country. In the upcoming future, we will decide on next steps. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, 3 Conservative ministers, senior political staffers, and the Prime Minister's favourite Chief of Staff pushed through a grant for a, quote, dear friend of the Conservatives. It was $1 million political gift. The Minister of Public Works only dared to go ahead after discussing this with the Prime Minister's own Chief of Staff. What was Nigel Wright doing in the approval process in the first place?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has made clear it is she who made the decision based on her belief that the project that assists those with disabilities in the Markham area was in the public interest. The Minister was acting within her discretionary authority as a minister. I think it's also clear she was acting in good faith, and Mr. Speaker, obviously will examine the report to determine how things can be done in the future.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, let's look at the facts, Mr. Speaker. Out of the 167 projects that were submitted, only 5 were chosen. The first 4 met all the criteria. The 5th was managed by a dear friend of the Conservatives, and according to the department's objective assessment, it was one of the worst projects out of the 167, but it was selected. If it was done in good faith, as the Prime Minister is pretending, why is the Ethics Commissioner so critical, and why is there this refusal to collaborate? Well, in fact, the facts are quite the contrary. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Minister was acting after an in-depth assessment. It was not a private project. It was a project to help people with disabilities. It was a public project in the interests of the public, and therefore I think that the evidence shows that the Minister acted in good faith. Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, here is what the evidence really says. Nigel Wright testified before the Ethics Commissioner and said that the Prime Minister asked him, and I quote, to sort out this grant to this Conservative friend. Does the Prime Minister ask his Chief of Staff to sort out all the grants that come before the government, or only those of dear friends who share the Prime Minister's plane? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Well, in fact, the truth is quite different.
With the specifics of any of these applications, I had no preference whatsoever on the applications, and it was the Minister herself who made the decisions.
The Honourable Member for Papineau.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made more alarming statements yesterday on the rights and freedoms of Canadians. Can he please explain to Canada's 500,000 Muslim women why he said their chosen faith is anti-women?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, I said no such thing. What's far more disconcerting is the statements that have been made by the Liberal leader and condemned by prominent organizations. B'nai B'rith Canada said the Liberals leader's language is divisive and only does a disservice to Canadians interested in dealing with pressing issues of the day. The threat of radicalization and jihadist terror is real. That's what another organization said. The Government of Canada has appropriately and consistently distinguished between marginal extreme terrorist elements of the Muslim community and the broader Muslim community. This distinction is reflected by the more than 300,000 Muslim immigrants who have been welcomed to Canada since 2006. Those are the...
The Honourable Member for Papineau.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister also said yesterday that religious freedoms should be overruled because almost all Canadians don't support the wearing of a niqab. We've seen this before. He was the Reform Party's policy chief when it voted to prevent Sikh RCMP officers from wearing turbans, saying it was a needless concession to a Canadian minority. 25 years later, why does he still insist that the majority should dictate the religious rights of minorities?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me quote what the organization Muslims Facing Tomorrow says. The requirement of Citizenship and Immigration Canada to remove full face coverings during citizenship ceremonies is not onerous and is consistent with the customs and conventions of an open, liberal, democratic society such as ours. Let me quote what the Coalition of Progressive Canadian Muslim Organizations says. Most Canadians believe that it is offensive that someone would hide their identity at the very moment where they are committing to join the Canadian family. Mr. Speaker, these are not the views only of the overwhelming majority of Canadians. They are the views of the overwhelming majority of moderate Muslims, Mr. Speaker. It's up to the leader of the Liberal Party to explain why he is so far outside that mainstream.
Order the Honourable Member for Papineau.
I just wish the Prime Minister had actually listened to what our courts said. Mr. President.
Mr. Speaker, there are still too many atrocities in the world being committed against women. But the Minister of Defence chose International Women's Day to continue his campaign of fear by publishing misleading photos. With this inappropriate act, over 500,000 Muslim women have been insulted by the minister. Will the Prime Minister finally ask his Minister of Defence to withdraw these misleading photos? The Honourable Minister of National Defence. Mr. Speaker, it is bizarre that the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party does not understand that one reason that we are in Iraq to help the government there and civilians is to protect women and girls who are raped, they are sexual slaves, according to the UN Commissioner of Human Rights, rape and other types of sexual exploitation are being used against these women. So we are taking action against this type of violence. Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. The Ethics Commissioner has determined that the former Human Resources Minister violated all the rules by giving preferential treatment to a Markham group. Now that the cat is out of the bag, the Prime Minister is trying to take his distance, but we understand what has happened. When she approved the grant against all the rules, it was Nigel Wright who held his arm, and the current Chief of Staff who probably gave the pen. So how can the Prime Minister refuse to admit his implication? Honourable Minister. Well, in fact, this is quite a ridiculous allegation. We have been trying to improve accessibility for people with disabilities. This was a valid project in the public interest. I accept the advice of the Ethics Commissioner so that the funding is managed fairly and responsibly for everyone. Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. The Prime Minister can't get out of this so easily. Either he mandated his Chief of Staff and his Secretary to have the Minister of Public Works favor a dear friend of the Conservative, or the members of his political staff are in league with the Minister. So what is the Prime Minister's explanation? He either has intervened on behalf of his dear friend, or he has lost control of his political staff. One or the other, it has to be the case. The Minister. Well, as the Prime Minister has said quite clearly, he had no role to play in these grants. I have always believed that that project was intended to help people with disabilities and improve accessibility for them, and it was in the best interest of the public.
Now, the Minister of Public Works tells us she doesn't remember talking to Nigel Wright about this deal that has gotten her into so much trouble. Now, that's really odd because Wright, the Prime Minister's right hand, not only remembers the conversation, remembers the content. And he said that that minister talked to him about this project that she knew was a dud, but she wanted to find out how important it was to the Conservative Party. The Prime Minister said, sort it out, and presto, $1 million flows to a Conservative ally. So will the Minister put aside this convenient amnesia and just explain to us why she put the interests of this party ahead of the interests of the Canadian people?
The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, if I felt that this was a good project to help people with disabilities, that was why I approved it. I certainly cooperated during the 3 years of the investigation with the Commissioner, and I said everything to invest in good faith.
She says she cooperated, but she doesn't remember talking to the Prime Minister's right hand. She broke the rules. She interfered in this project. The project that should never have been approved was pushed ahead, and the taxpayers were out $1 million because it was given to Conservative allies. It was not in the interest of the public. It was in the interest of Nigel Wright and this Prime Minister. She took a fund that was meant to help disabled people and turned it into a pork barrel trough. Why won't she at least have the decency to stand up and apologize?
Hello. The Honourable Minister of Public
In fact, I always thought that this was a valuable project and that it was in the public interest. Neither myself, nor my family, nor any of my friends stood to gain. And, Mr. Speaker, I never was involved. I never met with the Chief of Staff on this.
Minister and these Conservatives are playing politics with public money. In my own writing, in a tweet from former Conservative Senator Patrick Brazeau, it's being alleged that the Minister of Public Works pulled funding from the Jean Bosco Centre of Maniwaki because, quote, the NDP won the election. Whoa. So let me repeat the question for my constituents. How can the Prime Minister endorse such unacceptable and unethical behavior from this minister and this cabinet?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, an external and internal assessment showed that the Centre Jean Bosco was not, did not merit a grant of this nature. The NDP, of course, would fund anything, even if there are objective assessments that demonstrate that the recipient was not meriting the dollars in question. It's no wonder that the NDP and the Liberals would have to raise taxes. They would fund absolutely every request, even those that do not qualify.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac.
Well, the Community Centre, Jean Bosco, offers essential services to people in Maniwaki. According to Mr. Brazeau, the government withdrew its promise to fund this centre because Mr. Lawrence was beaten in the election. Even Nigel Wright was involved in the decision. Does the Prime Minister feel it is acceptable that people in Maniwaki are being punished in this way? The Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, well, both internal and external assessments have shown that the centre did not merit the funding despite the lobbying that was done. We respect taxpayers' money and we want to keep taxes low. We want to balance the budget. So this is another example of how the NDP and the Liberals want to increase tax irresponsibly, and we want to prevent them from doing that.
Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, Senator Wallen claimed to be living in Saskatchewan, but even her own staff say she lived in Toronto. It was so obvious that charging the Senate for her trips home was fraudulent that Conservative senators took her aside to warn her about her. Mr. Speaker, 93% of the Senator's trips included time in Toronto. Given how obvious this fraud was, why did the Prime Minister stand up in this place and claim her expenses were no different than those of other Western senators?
Good question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As you know, an independent audit found that Senator Wallen claimed inappropriate expenses, and as a result, we hope that she will face the full extent of the law for that. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, I hope that the member opposite will encourage her leader to cut a check for $600,000. That's the amount that the leader of the opposition and the House leader there owe for inappropriate mailings, Mr. Speaker. The total bill is $2.7 million to the taxpayer of Canada, and I certainly hope that that member will get on top of her leader and the others who are.
The Honourable Member for Hull-Elmer. Canadians are sick and tired of this culture of cronyism and favoritism, where Conservative friends always have their hand in the cookie jar. Pamela Wallen, the Conservative senator, spent all her time fundraising for the Conservatives, and she made taxpayers pick up the tab for her travel. She was forced to reimburse $150,000, but there are still 150 invoices that the RCMP finds are suspect. So why has the Prime Minister closed his eyes to this?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I have already said, an independent audit found that Ms. Wallen has spent irresponsibly.
Of the law for doing that. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, this member, I understand, owes personally $15,161. The office that she represents, the Whip's office, owes $35,633.
Got a check.
I hope that she'll find the time to make those two checks out to the taxpayer of Canada so that they're not left on the hook for those illegal expenses of the NDP.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. Well, things aren't going very well at all for the Conservatives. And here's a summary. There are subpoenas piling up at the door of the PMO in the Mike Duffy affair. The former Minister of Public Works has been found to have used favoritism and be in conflict of interest. The RCMP still has 150 invoices that are suspect when it comes to Pamela Wallin, and then there's the Maniwaki situation. So where is the good management and the ethical revolution we were promised, and why are they more and more like the Liberals?
Well, Mr. Speaker, talk about not going very well. This particular member owes the taxpayer of Canada over $122,000 for inappropriate mailings and office expenses, Mr. Speaker. Now, look, I know in every checkbook there's about 30 checks. He's written 29 of those checks out to the Separatist Party in Quebec. If he would just do the last check payable to the people of Canada for $122,122, he could clear up that debt, Mr. Speaker. So again, it's $122,122.
The honourable member for Random, Buren St. George's.
Mr. Speaker, when arranging to cover up for Mike Duffy, Nigel Wright said, "We are good to go" from the PM. Soon after, $90,000 was paid from Wright to Duffy. When then Human Resources Minister spoke to that same Nigel Wright about a project that had failed badly against all others but was good for the Conservative Party, Nigel Wright said the PM told him to sort it out. Soon after, this project was approved for more than $1 million. Wow. Just like Duffy, this leads right to the Prime Minister. Right. How can he defend this corruption?
Right. The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member should get her facts straight. I've always believed that this was a worthwhile project in the public interest, and in fact, neither I nor any of my family or friends had any personal interest in this matter. Mr. Speaker, far from being friends with Rabbi Mendelsohn, the proponent, we never even met. The Commission would recognize that. Yeah. But Mr. Speaker, when she talks about corruption, she should remember that her government disappeared with $40 million of taxpayers' money that has never been recovered.
The honourable member for Markham, Unionville.
Speaker, the member for New Brunswick Southwest made his racist comments nearly a week ago now, but the Prime Minister has said nothing, and he refuses to criticize them. This is a question of leadership. The Prime Minister needs to clearly state that these comments are unacceptable and apologize on behalf of his caucus. When will he do that? Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, I said a few days ago that the member recognized and acknowledged right away that these were inappropriate comments.
Speaker, two Conservative MPs, the members for Calgary East and Calgary Northeast, have both used very strong language to denounce these racist remarks. And we also know from a leaked briefing note that the Conservatives are super sensitive to their old anti-immigration Reform Party base. The only explanation for the Prime Minister's silence is that he has given in to these racist sentiments within his own party. How else can the Prime Minister justify his silence?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, the member immediately recognized that his comments were unacceptable and he's apologized.
The Honourable Member for Squamish-Fuca.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister's appearance at committee yesterday confirmed what Canadians already suspected. C-51 is a dangerous piece of legislation that lacks proper safeguards. The Privacy Commissioner has sounded the alarm, saying that the bill is unprecedented and excessive, with seriously deficient privacy safeguards. His words. But instead of reassuring Canadians by agreeing to a full parliamentary review of this bill and to stronger oversight, the Minister yesterday offered nothing more than overheated and inappropriate rhetoric. Why is the minister refusing to acknowledge the simple truth that more powers need more oversight?
Here, here, here. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we do agree that more power requires more oversight, and that's why in Bill C-51 there is embedded not only more oversight, but also more judicial oversight, but also more review body. And I really wonder why the NDP, if they are so keen on keeping an eye at our intelligence community, are not supporting Bill C-51. But I would argue that Canadians are keen on keeping an eye at those who are threatening us, and that's why I urge them to support Bill C-51. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Alfred-Pellan. Even those who used to work for our intelligence services are concerned about the overly broad scope of C-51. Former directors of CSIS and CERC criticize the lack of oversight and the lack of resources to counterbalance these agencies. Will the Conservatives listen to these people who are urging caution and agree to amend C-51 to ensure that intelligence services respect Canadians and obey our laws? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I would urge my colleague to have a look at the report of CERC, which says that not only does it have the capacity, but the expertise to do its job. It's an independent committee with a great deal of continuity, and there is no political interference in order to fulfill their role. For the past 30 years, they have been emitting security certificates, which attest that intelligence service operations respect Canadians and our laws, and the Director General confirmed that they have all the resources to carry out their mandate. So why is the NDP opposed to us having better tools to fight the terrorist threat?
More hot air than action from this government on public safety, and today we have yet another example. The RCMP criminal database is still seriously backlogged 6 years after the Auditor General sounded the alarm. We're talking about critical information that police rely on, like criminal records, not being entered into the database for 2 years. This is putting police and Canadians at risk. How could the minister allow this dangerous situation to continue?
Mr. Speaker, access to accurate and up-to-date criminal records information is critical for law enforcement across Canada. But the real question is, where were the NDP, Mr. Speaker, when this government has invested $180 million to develop a new fully automated and electronic criminal records management system at the RCMP? Mr. Speaker, was it of the NDP would still be in the dinosaur age? Now we are moving from a paper era to an electronic era. We are working with our provinces, with courtrooms, with also municipal police to have successful transition.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau.
Takes somebody to input the data.
The Canadian Police Association considers that the lack of resources for the RCMP is threatening Canadian safety. Currently, it takes 2 years to update criminal records. Because of the Conservatives' incompetence, our police forces must work with a database that is not up to date. We're asking them to fight terrorists and criminals with one hand tied behind their back. Will the minister finally fix this dangerous situation to protect our police forces and Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. It is extremely important, Mr. Speaker, for law enforcement agencies to have access to accurate information on criminal records, prosecutors and police forces. So why, when our government invests $180 million, why do the NDP remain sitting down? Why are they opposed to us updating our paper system to an electronic system? That's what we're doing. We're working with police forces, with the provinces. Canada is a partner. We're at the table, and we're going to continue to make sure that this is an effective model.
For Etobicoke Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question will be to the Minister of National Defence. This morning, there were reports that ISIL's on the verge of retreat into Crete, and those reports say that the Iraqi security forces and allied Shiite militias have now seized large parts of Tikrit, and as a consequence of that bold action, ISIL fighters are beginning to retreat. And I wonder if the Minister of National Defense would kindly provide an update to this House as to the current situation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
He's on my list. The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member from Etobicoke for his question. ISIL, of course, constitutes a threat to global security, including that of Canada. This is a genocidal terrorist organization that has explicitly targeted Canada on several occasions, and that must be opposed. And that is why I'm pleased to report that this past Monday, our CF-18 Hornet successfully struck a series of ISIL staging areas and fighting positions west of Kirkuk using precision-guided munitions. And on Sunday, our RCAF successfully struck 2 ISIL ammunition caches southeast of Haditha. Our airstrikes are targeting heavy weapons, vehicles, fighting positions, tactical units, and buildings used by ISIL throughout Iraq. We are tremendously proud of the men and women of the Royal Canadian Air Force.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Mr. Speaker, we all know that regional economic development agencies play a critical role across the country. They help small business and support our communities in diversifying. But under the Conservatives, money approved by Parliament for regional economic development in the West has been left unspent. The Conservatives allowed nearly $70 million to be unspent over 4 years. This is money that our communities badly need. When will the Conservatives commit to diversified economic development and stop taking the West for granted?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for the opportunity to correct her claims. In fact, our government has a very strong track record of supporting Western economic diversification, including things like supporting renewable power. We had a partnership with the First Nation Power Authority of Saskatchewan, for example. In opposition, the NDP have consistently opposed the growth of the Western economy by things like a carbon tax, Mr. Speaker, opposing the development of the energy sector, and certainly when we look at funding status, we would ask them to pay the $2.7 million back.
Mr. Speaker, the public accounts are clear. The Conservatives are failing to spend millions budgeted for economic diversification. It's bad enough that this government, since 2010, reduced by half the dollars committed to diversifying Western Canada's economy. Over the past 4 years, it also underspent its diversification budget by almost $70 million. This in the face of rejections of applications by our promising renewable energy sector. Why is the minister passing up the opportunity to create real economic diversification and jobs for Western Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of State.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. After coming into this portfolio, I introduced a merit-based system for the selection of applications through this. It's a call for proposals program, which has seen excellent proposals be funded in 5 key priority areas, including innovation, Mr. Speaker. One of these projects included a test site for carbon capture and storage technologies listed in Alberta, which would see the diversification of our economy by using the strength of our primary industry. Rather than denigrate our economy, I would ask the NDP to stand with us in these measures which support growth for all Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Bourassa-Péry. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are worried about the derailment of trains carrying oil. The number of tank cars carrying oil is increasing exponentially, and since the Lac-Mégantic tragedy, both the Auditor General and the Transportation Safety Board have criticized the government for its lack of inspection. The government has only hired one more inspector. That is not enough for rail safety. Does the minister find it sufficient? Honourable Minister of Transport.
Numbers are rail safety inspectors are up by 10%, and dangerous goods inspectors are up by over 85%. That being said, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to inform the House that today my officials at Transport Canada has provided an information update online with respect to the new car standard that they are looking at, which increases on what we've been working on with respect to tank car and containment here in the country, and I invite the honourable members to take a look at it.
There's still an oversight issue. Northern Ontario has now been affected by 3 train wrecks in less than a month. Communities are concerned for their safety, and the Conservatives' proposed disaster compensation fund falls far short of what's needed. A U.S. government study predicts the financial toll of a major accident could be as much as $6 billion. Transport Canada has its own analysis, but the government is keeping them secret. Will the minister make these risk analysis public so we can ensure our communities are protected?
I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Safe and Accountable Rail Act, which our government introduced last week, and I certainly do hope that the opposition members will support it full-throated because of the great things it does. For example, making sure that polluters do pay in the case of an untimely or accident with respect to rail. And specifically, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note that it's a very comprehensive regime. $1 billion in liability insurance backed up by a $250 million compensation fund paid by shippers, and all backstopped by being able to go out and charge railroads should it be in excess of that.
Member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, the previous government always ran a trade surplus, while this government has 49 months of a trade deficit. They're also weak on jobs, both quantity and quality. When CIBC reported that reality, the finance minister simply trashed them. CIBC's a sham, he said. But it's not just CIBC. The same jobs analysis came from TD Bank, the Bank of Canada, the OECD, Morgan Stanley, York University, the PBO, and many others. Are they all lying, Mr. Speaker? Are all of them a sham?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Actually, I'd sort of disappoint the honourable member, but what the parliamentary budget officer actually said is that this government has cut taxes by $3,400 for the average family, with a disproportionate amount of that money going to low and middle income families. Now, those lower taxes have helped create 1.2 million net new jobs, 80% full-time, 80% in the private sector, 2/3 in high-paying industries. The Liberal one-point plan for the economy is to raise taxes on families and job creators. We won't let them.
The Honourable Member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, this is a threadbare government in abject denial. They've increased taxes in each of their last 5 budgets. They've got the worst growth record in 8 decades. Job creation, only half of what the previous government achieved. Job quality, the worst in 25 years. 1/3 of those soon retiring have no savings. Consumer debt is the highest ever. Federal debt has grown by nearly $5,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. Does the minister not understand that a big majority of Canadians want something new and different and better than this government?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
That is exactly the kind of question.
Order. The member has asked a question. I'm sure he's quite keen to hear the answer. The Honourable Minister of Employment.
That is exactly the kind of question that we would expect from a party whose leader thinks budgets will just balance themselves.
Right.
The reality is, here are the facts. Income taxes are down by 10%, and after-tax incomes are up by 10%. In fact, they're up by 14% for the lowest income families. We've lowered taxes by $3,400 for the average family of 4. We've balanced the budget. We have the lowest debt as a share of our economy by far of any of the G7 economies, Mr. Speaker. We are going to continue with our economic action plan because it's working.
The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds. The wait times for processing the sponsorship applications of spouses of people in Canada is currently 25 months, Mr. Speaker, during which thousands of young Canadian families have to wait for answers in uncertainty. The minister told us that these wait times would be reduced, but on the contrary, they continue to increase. What's the problem? Is it a lack of resources, or is it indifference for the suffering of these people? Is the minister ready to recognize this problem? Will the minister finally reduce the wait times? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, obviously our government is very proud of our record of having reformed the entire immigration system over the past years. We have the best immigration rates in the history of Canada, including for family reunification, and that is why at the end of last year, and I greatly regret that the honourable member was not aware of this, but we announced another new reform, a pilot project to offer work permits to spouses who are sponsored. We have already issued thousands of these work permits, and we will continue to reform our system of immigration. The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, like the Trois-Rivières Airport, the regional airports across Quebec generate more than $3 billion of economic activity. The Quebec Federation of Chambers of Commerce is calling on the government to invest in regional airports to make them real drivers of economic development. But for years now, the Conservatives and the Liberals before them have been underfunding our airport facilities. Will the minister finally act to support the economic development of Quebec's regions? The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada, this one, has been helping airports across Canada. And this is for economic development. We work with our partners, and we created Economic Development Canada to support the extension of certain airport runways. We are working with organizations, and we will work with the local airport boards of directors.
Mr. Speaker, recently the Minister of International Trade and the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration welcomed China's long-term multiple entry visas for Canadians. Can the Minister of International Trade share with the House on how this significant announcement will benefit all Canadians, from tourists and business people to those visiting their families in China?
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I want to especially thank the member for South Vancouver for the critical role she played in securing 10-year multiple entry visas from China. These visas will make it easier for business people, family members, and tourists to travel to China. They will further strengthen our robust trade and investment relationship, cement our strong people-to-people ties with our second-largest trading partner. Canadians know that this government's priority is to reduce costs, cut red tape, and make it easier for Canadian small and medium-sized companies to increase exports and grow their businesses.
Member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, those were nice words from the Trade Minister, but in January, Canada posted a walloping $2.5 billion trade deficit, the second highest in our history. Our dismal trade performance is especially worrying given the weakness of the dollar, usually a boon to exporters, and the economic rebound in the United States, our largest foreign market. This government is very good at throwing $100,000 parties to announce unfinished trade deals, but it is ignoring this worrying erosion of our exporting muscle. When will this government finally table a budget with a plan to reverse this worrying decline?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member is quite wrong. In fact, in 2014, Canada posted a trade surplus of nearly $5 billion, with exports up 11% from the previous year. Our pro-export plan is working, and we will continue to promote the interests of our exporters and investors and manufacturers. What's more, our government's low-tax plan has resulted in the creation of 1.2 million new jobs in Canada. This is a record we're proud of, and these jobs are overwhelmingly in full-time private sector jobs in high-wage industries. Under the leadership of this Prime Minister, our government remains focused on creating...
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Employees of Air Canada at Pierre-Éliott Trudeau Airport are unhappy about having to work every day with a baggage scanner that functions only in English. And yet the Official Languages Commissioner has been clear. Air Canada employees have the right to work in the official language of their choice. This is far from being the first time that Air Canada has undermined the rights of francophones. Does the minister responsible for official languages find this situation acceptable? The Honourable Minister for Official Languages. Mr. Speaker, as I have said on many occasions, our government is very proud of our record with regard to official languages. These are the national languages of our country, and we have made a record investment of $1.1 billion that is shared with 14 departments who manage their files properly. So I would suggest to my colleague to speak directly with the department in question.
Don Valley West. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have been clear. They want their government to make decisions that will lead to more choice, lower prices, and better service in the wireless sector. For new wireless companies to be able to compete and provide choice to Canadians, spectrum is essential. Can the Minister of Industry please update this House on how last week's AWS-3 spectrum auction will deliver more choice for consumers in the wireless market?
The Honourable Minister of Industry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As everything in our lives, from academic pursuits to our digital economy, continue to grow, the demand for wireless spectrum is only going to continue to be a demand for Canadians. Canadians want the latest and best technology with fast download speeds in all areas of this country. Our spectrum policy has resulted in more spectrum being put into the hands of the marketplace to benefit consumers than any government before in Canada's history. But better than that, Mr. Speaker, when we formed government, less than 2% of all wireless spectrum was in the hands of wireless service providers other than the big three. Now, more than a quarter of all wireless spectrum is going to be in the hands of competitors, which will drive down prices and create more choice for Canadian consumers. It's a big win for Canadians.
For St. John South Mount Carroll.
Speaker, first, Canada Post eliminated home delivery without consulting Canadians. And now they're sending letters to people in St. John's notifying them that they'll soon have a community mailbox right in front of their homes on city easements. And they did this without consulting residents or getting the approval of the City of St. John's. Mr. Speaker, how can the minister allow Canada Post to install these mailboxes so close to people's homes and properties without permission?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, as we all know, Canada Post is facing a serious issue with respect to their ability to be self-sustaining. As a result, they've developed a 5-point plan. One of these points is to make sure that we move to community mailboxes. In siting these mailboxes, Canada Post must work with the communities, and they must consult with Canadians. They consulted with Canadians before they introduced the 5-point plan, and they should consult with Canadians now as they move forward in siting these community mailboxes.
Honourable Member for Verchères-les Patriotes. Mr. Speaker, the government boasts that it is there for families by giving tax cuts for intellectually disabled children. The people in my riding have noticed that the regulation that has to do with this tax credit was put in place without taking into account the condition of these people. For example, out of the 117 medical fees that are eligible, only some of them apply to autism. The eligible fees do not scarcely apply to this situation. When will the government take into the account intellectual disabilities in order to fulfill the needs of these families?
Madame la Ministre de l'Emploi.
Monsieur le Président, évidemment,
Mr. Speaker, obviously we are working to improve the quality of lives of persons with disabilities. That is why we created these funds, the Registered Disability Fund, so that families can save for the future of their disabled children. That is also why we created programs that help children, and these are programs that are flexible for children's needs, so that children, or rather families that have children with disabilities, can use these funds in the best way for them.
For today, I would like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of His Excellency Laszlo Trocani, Minister of Justice of the Republic of Hungary. I would also like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of two of the finalists for the 2015 Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for Political Writing, Joseph Heath and John Ralston Saul. Tabling of documents, dépôt de documents, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
Monsieur le Président, en conformité avec
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 32.2, I have the honor to